Despite it being challenging, I have learned that it is essential that I be politically engaged in some capacity. As a citizen of this country, voting is our way of sharing what we believe our community and society should be about. It's our contribution to the whole. It is our responsibility, a sacred responsibility, to really look at and understand who and what we're voting for. Have you been feeling disconnected, worried, or overwhelmed in life, or when you look at the state of our country and the world? If so, you're not alone. I'm right there with you, and you're in the right place. Hi, friends. Welcome to the Connected Way podcast. I'm your host and minister of connection, Rev Dev. I believe that connection is the healing path forward for us as individuals and as a collective. So on this podcast, we will explore all things connection to self, to others, to the land, and spirituality. But specifically in season 1, we are looking at the coming election through the lens of connection, how we can get informed and involved in politics and this election in digestible and engaging ways, how our spiritual and cultural beliefs and values intersect with and inform politics, how this election fits in with the larger evolution of our society, and how we can actually connect with people in these polarizing times. I know that connection has the capacity to move the needle in this election and in our individual and collective evolution. May it be so. Let's get into it. Well, friends, here we are. Welcome to the last episode of the Connected Way podcast before the election. To be clear, this is not the last time you'll hear from me. You may hear from me in like a week or two, possibly sooner. In fact, depending on what transpires in the next couple of days and how I'm feeling, I may even do a live broadcast on Instagram sometime following Election Day. So please follow me at RevDev_the Connected Way so that you don't miss that. And if I do that, it will end up on here eventually as well. But if you come live, then you can ask questions and comment and all the things. So welcome to the last pre-election episode. In the last 75 days since the podcast launched on August 21st, we have had 24 episodes, which have included 18 uniquely qualified and fascinating guests who have shared their wisdom, their insights, and sometimes even their opinions with us. And I have personally learned so much from these conversations. And for any and all of them that you have joined, I hope that you have learned a lot as well. I shared in episode 23 a reflection about what I've been seeing playing out in like the larger scale of what we're navigating in humanity and as a society in this country, about the massive transformation that I believe that this election is just one part of. And now in this episode, I want to focus on the election itself and what I'm seeing play out and how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. So I started this podcast because I was so aware of the disconnection that we have been experiencing, disconnection from our political system, disconnection from one another, disconnection from the larger perspective, and all the disconnection that's actually being created by this election. And I've learned a lot about how disconnection has been playing out throughout these conversations on the podcast, and I want to speak to some of that first. So throughout the season, we have had different conversations with interesting guests who have shared how political strategies work and how that's playing out and what is creating disconnection in the world and with politics specifically. For me, most notably is the conversation with Rev Carla in episode 12 about patriarchy, and then Catherine Stewart in episode 16 about Christian nationalism, and also the conversation with Professors Judith Rosenbaum and Liliana Harakova about misinformation and disinformation in episode 18. So there are some really fascinating and sometimes terrifying situations and also sometimes intentional tactics that disconnect people from themselves and even from reality. And one of the things that disconnects people the most is fear. And that is what feels most evident to me in conservative thinking and strategies. And that's not surprisingly similar energy to the fear that is deeply woven into Christian evangelism and Christian nationalism, which Rev. Carla talked about, and then Catherine Stewart talked about, and then even Brian Recker shared a lot about these like fear-based teachings of evangelical Christianity in episode 10. He's the ex-pastor. So in these churches, people are told that they will go to hell, that anyone who does not believe what they are told is right will go to hell, and anyone who does not act the way that they're told is right will go to hell. And it feels like there's this fear messaging going on in conservative politics right now, where, you know, if you don't vote for Trump, everything that you hold near and dear will be taken away. And there are some really smart people, I think, doing this. And I want to be clear that this is not just playing out in conservative politics. I think politics in general can be fear-based, and we did see that play out with liberal messaging as well to some degree. And so I think it's happening on both sides, but it's definitely happening more in conservative politics. And it feels like people are sort of blindly believing these lies that they're being told and are incredibly attached to those lies because they're fear-based. And the fear thing is super interesting to me because there's in spiritual communities, there's this sort of idea of like you can choose fear or you can choose love. And that's a really big teaching in the spiritual tradition of A Course in Miracles. But it's been kind of adopted throughout New Age spirituality in general. It's like, do you choose love or do you choose fear? And fear is the disconnected, whereas love is the connected. And I do believe that. And so I've been really curious about like, why is fear such a thing that's playing out right now? And I do think that it is related to these massive transformations that we're going through, because I think that we're moving from a fear-based society to more of a love and potential-based society. I hope that's true, but I think that the fear is really rising as people hold on for dear life to the old sort of control model. So, in looking at this fear thing, about a month ago, a friend shared an Instagram reel with me that she thought I might be interested in that was specifically about psychology and politics. And I was like hooked. So this reel was by a person named Keegan Tatum, and I'm going to link the reel in the show notes. But what they spoke to is that there's this neuroscience study that showed the difference in brain activity and makeup of conservatives and liberals. And I tried multiple times to get Keegan Tatum on the podcast, but never heard back. But after seeing the reel, I wanted to learn more about what this was about, both because I was curious about the fear factor, which was brought up in this Instagram reel with conservatives and what their brain activity was doing, because I had seen this playing out, but also because I was like, could this explain some of the serious division in the country between people? Because it seems like we live in this very separated society and country. So I went online to learn more about what Keegan Tatum was referencing and found this fascinating article in Scientific American that was written by a journalist named Lydia Denworth. And it was actually published almost exactly 4 years ago, just before the 2020 election. So the article itself largely relies on a neuroscience study and then book that was published in 2013 called Predisposed, and then also another study that was done in 2017. And so I'm going to share that article in the show notes with you and on the episode webpage. But I just want to read a couple of snippets from this article because it's so fascinating. Quote, if the differences between liberals and conservatives seem profound and even unbridgeable, it is because they are rooted in personality characteristics and biological predispositions. On the whole, the research shows conservatives desire security, predictability, and authority more than liberals do. And liberals are more comfortable with novelty, nuance, and complexity. If you put a conservative and a liberal in an MRI and presented them with identical images, you would see differences in their brain, especially in the areas that process social and emotional information. The volume of gray matter making up the anterior cingulate cortex, sorry for the science terms, everybody, this area that helps detect errors and resolve conflicts tends to be larger in liberals. And the amygdala, which is important for regulating emotions and evaluating threats, is larger in conservatives, end quote. The article mentions then another scientist and study that looked at a group of people for 3 years and found that the people with conservative brain structures, so with that larger amygdala, were less likely to participate in political protests. So it's not like, hey, you're a conservative, do you go to protests? It was like, I'm going to study your brain, and then I want to know what your activity is. And this scientist said, quote, that makes sense insofar as political protest is a behavior that says we've got to change the system, right? So there's not as much of a predilection for change, like let's make change. For people who have larger amygdala structures, there's more of a sense of fear. So here's a couple of additional snippets from the article. I'm just reading sort of different quotes that I pulled. Quote, political neuroscience attempts to study evidence that a belief or bias manifests as a measure of brain activity or volume, demonstrating that an attitude, conviction, or misconception is in fact genuine. So what that's saying, I think, is that neuroscience can show us basically that people are having these experiences, they're noticing things, and they really actually feel true. So this can explain why we're looking at people and how are you living in this completely different reality than I'm living in? And the article also says, quote, partisan identity does not just affect our vote. It clouds our memory, reasoning, and even our perception of truth. Understanding the influence of partisanship on identity, even down to the level of neurons, helps to explain why people place party loyalty over policy and even over truth. The more strongly we identify with a party, the more likely we are to double down on our support of it. That tendency is exacerbated by rampant political misinformation. Yes, we know that's true. And too often, identity wins out over accuracy. End quote. Fascinating. Isn't that so interesting? And so this has to do with brain chemistry and brain structure, which is so incredible. So the article then says, quote, there is also an unresolved chicken and egg problem. Do brains start out processing the world differently, or do they become increasingly different as our politics evolve? Knowing this will not magically bring us together, but researchers hope that continuing to understand the way partisanship influences our brain might at least allow us to counter its worst effects, the divisiveness that can tear apart the shared values required to retain a sense of national unity. End quote. Yes, please. So again, I find this article absolutely fascinating, and I'm going to share it with you. But what really makes sense to me is that the part of the brain that is fear-based, that needs security, predictability, and authority, is stronger in conservatives. So I want to be really clear that I am not saying that to condemn conservatives. In fact, I hope it helps us to understand conservatives more, to really look at someone and be like, hey, okay, so you have a different experience than I have. And as always, I want us to be curious and not judgmental. Thank you, Ted Lasso. Isn't it curious that brain chemistry may be correlated with people's values in politics? Which, again, brings me back to the point that was a theme throughout the entire season, which was how do we connect with people who we don't agree with? More than ever, it seems we're in this wildly disconnected and divisive society with people having such incredibly different concerns, values, and even realities, which can make it incredibly challenging to connect and to find common ground, which is one of the most concerning things to me in general about what's going on in our country and in the world. We need to find a way to connect with one another and to have discussions about what we care about. We have to find common ground. But as was evidenced by the conversation that I had with my uncle, that can be super hard to do when we're living in completely different realities with very different versions of the truth because we're hearing different things, right? So for many years, I have been astonished that there are seemingly not checks and balances for media or politicians. that fact checking is not required, that what seems to be like, to me, to be rampant lying is just thrown around. And I understand more and more and more, and especially after the episode on misinformation and disinformation, that this is really like nuance. It's like manipulation of fact. It's not that there is one truth. It's more that there's lots of different versions of the truth, but like, how do we start with common fact? Because not having any common fact means that you can't really have the conversation. So I really hope that somehow we can bridge the gap that's so wide by somehow having some sort of regulation of media. I don't know how that happens, but no matter what, we need to connect with one another. And so we need to be curious. We need to be, listening to one another and find common ground and find a way forward. And this kind of comes back to something that I've been thinking about as it relates to fear. I am not saying at all that liberals are not scared. In fact, I sometimes wonder if fear is actually one of our ways to find common ground. Like, I'm scared. Are you scared? What are you scared about? This is what I'm scared about, right? That actually was a huge part of the conversation that I had with my uncle. A lot of it was about fear, right? And so that can be really hard to do. But I think that it's really important to understand that fear is present in the world right now, that we are navigating wars, we are navigating pandemics, we are navigating a massive climate crisis. And in fact, there is a lot that's terrifying. And so can we find common ground and actually listen to like, hey, what are you scared of, right? So that actually, I think, may be a great entry point to talking to people that you have differences with. That said, there is a difference between having fear be a part of our experience and fear driving all of our decisions. So I don't think I know anyone who isn't concerned in some fashion about our future. But the difference I see between conservatives and liberals on a very large scale is that conservatives are making decisions based on fear. So there is the fear of being attacked, fear of others taking what is ours, fear of running out of resources, fear of the other. And so there's this sense of like holding on to our own resources. Whereas it feels, this is a very generalized comment, it feels more like liberals are making decisions based on caring for the larger collective and sort of considering nuanced potential. And again, this comes back to, are we making decisions out of hope and potential or out of fear? So as a metaphor, for me, what I imagine is like a pearl, right? And I imagine that a conservative is sort of closing up their hands and grasping it very tightly, super tightly in their hands. It's what they've been told to do, and it's what feels right to them. It's like hold on to it for themselves. Like, oh my gosh, somebody's going to take it from me. I need to hold on to it because I am terrified. Whereas it feels like liberals are maybe holding their palms open, maybe not like completely open because they're like, I'm great, everything's fine. Right? Like it's more like, okay, I'm going to open this up because I know that it's right to open this up and I want to be trusting and I want to imagine that there is potential for good to be done. And so I'm going to open my hands out and I'm going to open it to what is possible with others. So that is what it feels like is happening to me, is this like grasping and holding on out of fear and this like, sometimes a little bit tentative and sometimes completely wide open, opening up to others. That's what it feels like to me. And that's playing out on so many different scales. So that's sort of the partisanship thing that I see playing out in terms of connection and disconnection, hope and fear. I understand that this is like very broad strokes, right? I'm talking about sort of overall themes. I'm not talking about individual people. I understand that there is nuance. And in general, it's a spectrum. There's like the very right side of the spectrum, the very left side of the spectrum. And along that spectrum are different values and beliefs. There are different experiences. And there's also different levels of disconnection and connection, different levels of fear and hope. And maybe you're existing with both fear and hope, or maybe you're all in fear, maybe you're all in hope. And I'm not sure that it's like have one or the other. I think it's kind of like, how do we have both and how do we hold more nuance and possibility? So in addition to what I've learned about partisanship and psychology and disconnection and connection throughout this season and how that's playing out with different people, I now want to share how some of these conversations have shaped my views and experience of politics in this election, and basically like where I'm at, how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking about politics, about this election and voting. So first, despite it being challenging, I have learned for myself that it is essential that I be politically engaged in some capacity. As a citizen of this country, voting is our way of sharing what we believe our community and society should be about. It's our contribution to the whole. It is our responsibility, a sacred responsibility, to really look at and understand who and what we're voting for. And also to vote all the way down the ballot, because our local races, as I talked to Michael Gaudini about in episode 3, are really important for the way that we live in the world. They impact us on a local level, and then local governments are the building blocks on which like the next level of government is built on, and so on and so forth. And I know it's easy to not stay engaged and understand who is who. So like me, you might not have previously gone into a voting booth completely sure about who all of the candidates were in all of your races. That can be overwhelming. So if you haven't voted yet, I highly recommend you go to votesaveamerica.com. And on there, you just click I'm voting to see all of the races and measures and everything that will be on your exact ballot. It's an incredible resource that gives you information about everything that you're voting on. And you can even email yourself a copy of the choices that you make so you can then take them into the voting booth when you're voting, which is so helpful, and it will save you time. But also it allows you to like sit with it when you're going through everything. I've also learned that if you can go beyond voting, getting engaged with a candidate or issue that you really care about is a way to have more influence and support a cause or a person you really value and agree with, but also like it makes you feel more engaged and connected to your community. And I actually think that starting on the local level is the best way to do that. Like going to a meeting to meet one of your local council candidates. I did that. Just learning about people more, having conversations with other people, because it does actually really affect things. And like I said, what happens on the local scale then affects everything else and vice versa. So that may seem obvious, but the importance of it has really been heightened for me throughout these podcast interviews. And one of the conversations that has had the most impact on me personally in regards to politics was the conversation that I had with Brian Derrick, who founded Oath. And we had this conversation about money and politics. And I had wanted to have this conversation. It's one of the reasons I started the podcast. But money and politics has been like increasingly upsetting for me over time. And yes, I'm super sick of the manipulative fear and urgency-based strategies used in fundraising and like the deadlines and the matches and that we're being outspent and we might lose if you don't give us this $5 right now. So for me, not only do those tactics not work, they make me really angry because I hate that they're utilizing fear on people, but they're also creating anxiety, which is really bad for people's mental health. Anyways, on top of that, some of the campaigns don't need the money, which is why I wanted so badly to speak to Brian, because he called that out and I wanted to know more about it. I had been wondering it for a long time, but I'm so glad that he and his team and other organizations are trying to change the way that people can donate to campaigns and like actually have a real impact on causes they care about. Because the thing that actually impacted me the most from that episode was something that Brian said when I asked if we could just get rid of donating altogether. Like, I thought that it would be great to reform campaign finances altogether so that everything is like evenly distributed and equal and none of this insanity plays out and we can just get rid of all of that. And I was like, oh, this is so smart to do this. And he was like, well... He shared that donating is a way for us to contribute to what we care about and to contribute to change. And so in that conversation, I realized that donations are actually an added way for us to be engaged in creating the world we want to live in, just as our vote is, right? That said, obviously, a lot needs to change. Going into that conversation, I felt like there were clear issues with the way that campaign financing works. And I learned even more from Brian about how incredibly influential donors can be and how dangerous that absolutely is. So one of our biggest issues in politics is money, and especially the outrageously outsized influence that very few people, like even one person, can have because of the money that they can spend on a campaign or cause. And so we are clearly seeing that play out in this election, probably the worst that it has ever played out, which speaks to how broken our system is. And obviously there needs to be reform, but also we are engaged as people by donating, which is great. That's like one of the levers that we can use, but those levers need to be controlled, basically, is the point. So that's a big place where reform needs to happen. Which brings me to the next thing that I want to address in general, which is reform, systemic reform, because as I have gone on this journey of learning more about the election, learning more about politics and like how our system works, and just generally getting more informed, there was a thread that I like sort of had at the beginning of these conversations. Well, more than sort of, but it became a clearer thread and theme as the season progressed, which is that we are dealing with a broken system. I am not informed enough to wisely speak to exactly what is broken with the system, and I surely can't tell you how to fix it. But I know that the way our current government system and societal system is set up is not working. And when I say working, I mean it's not effective in reaching its goals. In fact, I'm not even sure what the goals are anymore. And I'm not sure they're clear to everybody. I guess to me, the goal would be to have a government that takes care of its people. But there's a lot of subjective opinion that one can have about what it means for the government to take care of its people. We've already covered that division and deception in the media and politics isn't working, no matter what side of the campaign you're on. Campaign financing isn't working. And then systemically, there are major concerns with the Supreme Court setup, the Electoral College setup, the two-party setup, the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex, general corruption and influence within the system, not to mention the inequality and harm that has been caused by so many Americans at the hands of our quote unquote founding fathers of this country, and all that has come since then, and so much more. All of that is to say that no matter what, the next president is absolutely inheriting a broken system. And I truly believe that this election will impact whether the system begins to be repaired, rebuilt, or whatever needs to happen with it. The breaks in the system at least need to be exposed. Or if the system is going to be degraded even further. I believe that Trump's leadership would bend this system so far that it wouldn't sustain, it would completely crumble. I have no idea what that would look like, but I do think that's true. I also don't know what it would look like for the Harris-Walz administration to fix some of the brokenness of the system, but I do believe that they would try and be more open to it and open to listening to the constituents of this country, the citizens of this country, than Trump would. He would not care. All of that said, it may seem like I'm blindly following Kamala Harris, which I am not. I am voting for her, to be clear, but I want to specifically acknowledge one thing in particular that I am struggling with when it comes to Kamala Harris. And I know that some of you are feeling the same way. I do not understand how arms and money are still being sent to Israel. I am still not knowledgeable enough on this topic to be really able to speak to it clearly or to understand it or to share any type of expertise that I do not have. But my guess is that it's related to a very complex system, which involves money, oil, natural resources, the military-industrial complex, and of course, power. Regardless of the reasoning, something feels really off about this situation. I understand that Hamas brutally attacked and murdered 1,200 people on October 7th last year. And I understand that the initial motivation of this war was Israel defending itself, which many people feel that they should be able to do. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not sure if war is okay, period. And perhaps that negotiations could have been made initially. I don't know. But even if it feels that it was warranted at the time for Israel to defend itself, this is no longer defense. It hasn't been for a very long time. Israel has killed at least 42,000 Palestinians and basically destroyed everything that was Gaza. The U.S. is helping to fund what I consider a genocide. And that is my biggest gripe with Kamala Harris. I want her to make a much stronger stand against the genocide in Palestine and stop funding this war. And I would be disingenuous if I just said that I loved everything about her, her politics, and what she's doing. So I have to be honest with you about that. That said, I will yet again go back to the quote by Brittany Packnett Cunningham that she shared, I believe, in August, and I shared in episode 3 with Michael Gaudini. She said, quote, "I believe politicians are not gods. They are our employees. They are fallible because humans are fallible, and I have yet to vote for one with whom I agree on absolutely everything all the time. I also recognize that it should be impossible for a politician to be pleasing to any and everyone in everything, so that is not my litmus test. My personal litmus test is who can help me advance the goals, not perfection, usefulness. Politicians are not gods. They are our employees. So let us not judge them on being perfect or pleasing to any and everyone and everything, but rather judge them by their usefulness. Who can help me advance the goals?" Brittany Packnett Cunningham, thank you for this. It has been my mantra, and it will continue to be my mantra. And I think it is so important for us to understand that it is about usefulness, not perfection. And for me right now, the answer right now of who is useful is absolutely, without a doubt, Kamala Harris. I believe that of the options we have, she is 1,000% the person that we need as our next president. She has the potential to affect real change and move us forward as a country. And more importantly than that, we won't go backwards and backslide, as I truly believe we would if she's not elected. I do, in fact, mean that in regards to Palestine, because I believe that Trump's chummy relationship with Netanyahu is a serious threat, and that he really doesn't care about any peoples or have any strategies to help struggling people in the U.S., especially non-white people. So why would he help anyone in any other country unless it somehow benefited him personally? And helping his buddy in Israel is more likely to benefit him personally than standing up against someone he reveres. So despite not agreeing with Kamala Harris's current stance on the Israeli-Palestine conflict, I believe she will be the most effective option for us, the most useful option for those of us that want to see this changed. And to that point, if this is an issue that is making you consider not voting, please think again. Whether it's this issue or there are other issues that you're feeling apathetic about towards the options and the candidates, please take a look at their policies. Do a little bit of research to look at what their policies are and what they're planning to do and who they're planning to surround themselves with, and make a decision based on what you see between one of these two candidates. I have personally done a little bit of phone banking, which honestly is a bit of an emotional roller coaster. There were a lot of hang-ups, and please remove me from this list. But the calls with substance I had took on two flavors. One was like the exuberant person who was so excited to hear from me and share that they were voting for Kamala Harris and thank me for volunteering and so on and so forth. And then there were the really hard calls. And they weren't the ones where someone had different views. There were a couple of those, but that wasn't the hard part. The hard part was actually the ones where people didn't want to vote because they thought it didn't matter. They didn't like either option and felt like the political system was a disaster. So it didn't matter if they voted. Or one call where someone was just straight up lethargic and like the dictionary definition of apathetic about it. This makes me think every single time about what Andrew Zaro so profoundly shared with us in episode 5, that division isn't the downfall of democracy. Apathy is the downfall of democracy. It's actually good that we have different views with different people. It's what makes democracy thrive. And in an ideal world, we will have a multiracial, multi-faith democracy made up of diverse voices that actually represent our country and its makeup. But hopefully those diverse voices are ones that are coming from a place of being of service to their values, of service to their people. And ideally, those values are rooted in a healthy intention of being of service to others, because that is maybe idealistically what politics was really meant to be about, being of service to the people, taking care of the people. Which brings me back to the point. Please, 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 please vote. If you feel like the system is broken, so you don't want to be a part of it, well, this is the system we have right now. So we have to make a choice that we think can contribute to change. If you feel apathetic because you don't love either of the candidates, well, these are the two candidates in the system we have right now. So choose one. And I get it that in an ideal world, you want to have a different system with more than two parties, and you may even consider voting for a third party candidate right now. But that is not how our system works yet. So please don't waste your vote on a candidate that does not even have a remote chance of winning. That is not how the system gets changed, at least not yet. Please vote for who you think will serve the people of this country better and who will be the most effective employee moving the goals forward. And to me, there is not a doubt in my mind that that person is Kamala Harris. And let me share a few reasons why from a political standpoint. There are a lot of issues that really matter to me. Reproductive rights and the rights of women in general. LGBTQ plus rights, civil rights, the rights of Indigenous people and the land that they were original stewards of, and most importantly, the land itself. Yes. Honestly, reproductive rights is one of the biggest drivers in my mind, and I have very strong feelings about reproductive rights. But I'll be honest, the rights of the earth, if that's what you want to call it, taking care of the earth, is possibly even more urgent than that right now. I'm not saying we have to choose. Please, for the love of God, let's not choose. I want us to choose human women, but also Mother Earth. We cannot go back. The impacts of each moment of harm that we cause to this earth are irreparable and compounding. We cannot continue like this. We cannot continue to treat the earth as a resource. We have to make change, and we have to make a lot of change very quickly. This is actually an existential crisis, and it must be addressed. And outside of funding Israel, Kamala Harris's policies about the environment, about women's health, about reproductive health, LGBTQ plus rights, everything that I have mentioned, Kamala Harris's policies are without a doubt better for the people of the US, better for humans in general, and absolutely better for the earth. And if we can deliver her the Senate and the House as well, I think she could make some seriously big moves that could be really, really, really positive. I shared at the beginning of this podcast season that I have felt for a very long time that this election is an opportunity for the country to choose between connection and disconnection, between individualism and collectivism, taking care of the self or taking care of the whole. That a vote for Trump is a vote for a government focused on individual control and gain, and a vote for Kamala is a vote for a government focused on taking care of all of the people of the United States. I know that that is grossly oversimplified, but in many ways, I do still feel that that is true. I personally believe that we should be taking care of all the people, not just those of us that are privileged. Because of corporate and personal gain, healthcare costs are higher, childcare costs are higher. There's a housing crisis and an unhoused crisis. We're in a climate crisis. And I also personally believe that our capitalistic system has deeply impacted the mental, physical, and spiritual health and well-being of the country and its people. We need a system that supports its people. And I feel very strongly that Kamala's economic and social policies are going to support the people far better. What I also see is a strong difference in leadership and relationship styles, which is also a part of politics. It's not just about the policies, it's about leadership and relationships. As someone who is obsessed with connection, if I look at these two candidates, I see very different approaches, styles, and possibilities because of these approaches and styles. In Trump, I see someone who wants to surround himself with people who pump him up, who play to his ego, which is a really dangerous situation because anyone smart enough to know that about him can manipulate their way into his inner circle and cause serious damage to the country. We have seen that before, we see it now, and we will continue to see it with him no matter what he does or where he is. I also don't think that he will be a good advocate for the country. He will not inspire trust, confidence, or collaboration with people within the country or with people outside the country and leaders in other countries. He is not a good relationship builder. He is not a collaborator, and he is not a good advocate. In fact, not only will he not create good relationships, he will continue to degrade relationships between the people of this country and beyond. He incites fear, violence, hatred, and disconnection between people, which is the definition of a disconnected leader. On the other hand, I look at Kamala Harris, and what I see is a strong woman who has strong values, cares about being of service, and cares about people. And yes, as I've already said, she's not perfect, but she cares, and I believe she will listen. She is a good spokesperson for the country. She wants to create connections and heal parts of our system and country that are broken and not working. She is smart, and she cares about connecting with people. What I see is someone who values relationships, who does the work to build relationships, and she has good relationships. She is surrounded by good people with good heads on their shoulders. I'm not saying that she's a saint. Nobody is. But she knows how to work with herself, and she is allowing herself to be fallible and make mistakes and learn from them. She will also build good relationships and be surrounded by good people. She will care about the people of this country and others. As she has said many times, she has one client. It is the people. And I believe her. What I see is that a vote for Kamala is a vote for acceptance, connection, positive change, and forward movement towards what is possible. Whereas a vote for Trump is a vote for disconnection and fear-based grasping at the old paradigm of individualistic control and degradation of potential. I truly hope that we are a nation that will show up for acceptance, connection, and hope for what might be possible. If you've already voted, thank you. And if you're able to get out in the next couple of days to help out, please do. If you haven't already voted, please vote and vote with your soul. And vote all the way down the ballot because they all matter. Again, if you want to see what's on your ballot so you can be prepared, you can go to votesaveamerica.com to get specific information about your ballot. Thanks for joining me on this journey of learning about the election and politics through the lens of connection. What a ride it has been, friends. I will be thinking of you in the next couple of days. I know this can be a really challenging time and very emotional. There's anxiety and excitement and all kinds of other things. So find connection. Call or meet up with a friend to talk about how you're feeling or intentionally to not talk about how you're feeling. Watch a classic movie you love, maybe go for a walk, hug a tree, hug a human. And if you need or want support anytime, you can come and join the Connected Collective. There will be lots of support on Election Day and beyond because you are not alone. I will be thinking of all of you in the coming days. I will connect with those of you that are in the collective. And of course, you can always find me on social media or theconnectedway.com where I will be sharing. And today, although I've never done it before on the podcast, it feels appropriate to end with a prayer. Divine mystery, spirit, God of so many names and no name at all, please watch over our country. Guide us to connection, to care, to compassion, to interconnectedness, interbeingness, omnibeneficence. We are here, we are listening, and we are showing up. I ask that you watch over the country and that you watch over and hold all of those who are listening to this podcast, no matter when they are listening or where they are listening, wrapping us in love, ease, flow, and presence as we navigate the days ahead and all that is to come. Thank you for bringing us together on this journey, and thank you for guiding us forward as individuals and as a collective. May we choose connection. May it be so, and so it is. Thanks, friends. I'll see you on the other side. Thanks for joining me for this episode of The Connected Way. You can find all the resources mentioned in the show and even more resources in the show notes and on the podcast page at theconnectedway.com/podcast. Before you go, a note about sponsorship. This podcast is currently sponsored by me, Rev Dev, and you, the listeners. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and the work of The Connected Way, enhancing individual and collective connection to self, others, the land, and spirituality, you can donate on the podcast webpage. There is never any pressure or expectation, but if you feel called to support the work, any contribution of any amount helps, as do your good thoughts. And finally, I'd love to hear your biggest takeaway from today's show. What inspired you? What surprised you or made you think? Let me know by posting a comment on any of the posts or DMing me on Instagram, or of course, you can always send me a message on the website. Thanks again for being here, friends. May this podcast bring more connection to you and the collective. And so it is. See you next time.